Back to Pray Tell blog. I'm visiting with Pablo Ocañas and Estella García-López from here in Houston and from Oregon, Portland, Oregon. And we're going to talk about the ministry of Spanish choirs. It's an area about which I know absolutely nothing, so I'm here to learn at your feet. So I would like to ask you this, Spanish choirs, what does that mean? How are Spanish choirs different from other choirs of other ethnic groups in the church? What do you think is just really the nature of Spanish choirs that we all should know about?
Well, Spanish choirs are very vibrant and very jovial. And it's not just the language, but the style, the culture, and the gestures that come around, that revolve around Spanish singing and praising.
Spanish choirs love to eat, they love to dance, they love to be together, celebrate at every moment that they can. And the music that we sing, the music that we pray with is exuberant. It can be meditative, but it's usually rather lively. And many singers here in the Southwest are very into their trade of singing with their heart.
Can I ask you, I love it. That's sort of, I think, what we all love about these ethnic groups, because I'm sure there's a wide variety there. What's the range of diversity? Can we say that all of them are like that? Or is there a variety of styles being sung, including non-Hispanic and non-Spanish styles?
Oh, yes. The Hispanic church is very wide and diverse. You can encompass people, mostly from Mexico because they're our border, neighbor. But you have so many people immigrating to the U.S. from Central America, South America, from Cuba, from Puerto Rico. And depending from what country you're from, you get different styles. There are some basic styles that are kind of the same, and there are some styles where, they're very similar to American styles like the balada, the ballad, the rock. But it is very diverse.
When we celebrate at St. Cecelia our Hispanic culture, we probably have about 25 or 28 different flags that are raised on that International Day.
Yes.
And I would probably guess that it's very similar in different communities, because to be a Latino Hispanic, that's such a broad range of who that encompasses. And it's both, it registers in the language and the food and the styles. And it sort of depends on where you are and who's settled in your area and who's celebrating at your particular parish. And at different parishes, it could even be that maybe one style is quite different in that Hispanic culture than the next Mass that's celebrated also in Spanish. So it depends on the area in which you live and the training of the people, the educational system that the singers come from, their musical interests, and also the directorship.
Okay. Is it fair to say that many Hispanic choir members are not note readers? Is that more typical of these ethnic groups?
The average Spanish choir probably does not read music, but there are pockets of choirs that have been here for many generations, just like Pablo Ocañas. He's trained and helps train his choir members and probably attracts people to read music. But in the areas where they don't have trained musicians, then you're probably not going to have members that read music. So what is happening now is that many of the English choir directors are working with Spanish choirs, which is wonderful because they do want to learn. They just don't have the skills to do that.
Spanish choirs have members that are well educated in many ways, musical and not. And there's so many ways of learning music. Some people learn through elementary school, middle school, high school, programs that are choral, instrumental, both band and orchestra. Some people are in musical theater, and they bring that to church with them. Some people are on the apprentice model where they learn with grandma or grandpa or an aunt and uncle or a parent. And those traditions are very rich. And it's exciting to hear families who bring their talent to church and their unique style. It's beautiful to see. For example, in Conroe, on the north side of Houston, we have a group up there. There's a mandolin ensemble, and it's grown with guitars and with other instruments. And not only do they sing beautifully, but they have this very rich tradition of accompanying, and they can play for 20 minutes, all sorts of varieties memorized, and they can follow notes. But not everyone does follow notes. But following musical notes is not a precursor to being an excellent musician.
So how does that work if I am what you had described, a non-Hispanic English speaker who is now going to direct a Hispanic choir? How does the printed music work? Do I buy the printed music, from OCP or World Library or wherever and then rehearse it? I mean, that's what I'm used to, that I sort of learn all the parts before I walk into the rehearsal. I hand out the music to everyone, and everyone learns to read the music, but not everyone is equally able to read notes. I'm guessing that the model isn't quite like that. It's not as bound to the notes on the page.
I think a lot of it depends on the age of the group that is singing. We have Hispanic choirs that are young singers in elementary school, and we have some that are in Catholic school choirs where they sing in Spanish. We have middle school, high school kids, of course, parish choirs that have all ages, and many of the choirs that I've worked with in Houston have very young children in them, as well as older choir members who may have been in that choir now for their 20th or 30th year, and everyone's working together. And it depends on the training of the director, the approach that they're going to follow. And my approach is probably a little different than other folks, because while I do have a music-centered program, I would actually say that I first start by honoring who my musicians are, understanding how they work, how they learn, and building steps incrementally towards music literacy. I don't assume that just because somebody cannot read music, that they aren't musical, that they cannot sing. Those are assumptions that we probably need to throw out the door. But our Hispanic communities in the United States have very rich cultural backgrounds, and our singers are arriving with a repertoire, both from the radio, both from how they sing in their communities, at schools, and we need to honor their traditions that are already within and push them and build. It needs to be a thrust. If we're going to work on that model of walking in and just reading what's in front of you, it takes effort, it takes time and dedication and patience, and then along the way, enjoying your time with Latinos who love singing and dancing and praying together.
Stella, what would you say about how printed music on the page works in Hispanic choirs in your experience?
Well, I've worked with many choirs, and some of the first choirs that I worked with, there was these older ladies, older people, and people that are older, they are set in their own ways. This is how I do it. This is how I know how to do it. And I told them, well, if you're going to be in this choir, you're going to be reading music. So open your book. But I don't read music. It doesn't matter. You're going to learn. And they were very resistant. But I'll be golly, a few years later, I gave them just lyrics because we were singing this one song as a farewell to one of the priests. And she looked at me and she says, I hate to admit this, one of the ladies, but I wish I would have had the notes. I go, yes, see, you've learned how to read music. And persistence is the key, and you're going to get resistance. You are. But eventually they begin to rely on those little shapes, and then they get it.
And that's an awesome example. I've had similar experiences over the years where my singers have grown to be accustomed to the notes and the pitches and the guidance that's provided in print. And when you do hand them something that doesn't have a guide for how long the rhythm is, when to sing, when to not sing, what the pitch level is, that actually throws them off a bit. But I will say that in addition to encouraging my singers to sing from the heart, I do encourage them to write music, to follow both the printed words and the printed notes, with their fingers and show me where they are so that as they are tracking, I can see where they are in their development, in their reading. And there are times that we're moving and we're singing, and then we translate that to written notes, and we have exercises, small chunks of how to read music, scalar exercises that sometimes it's a 4-note exercise. It could be an 8-note exercise, but we get the practice of here's a pitch. The next one, is it the same? Is it different? Are we going higher, lower? And we spend a lot of time building the vocabulary of music. And we share that, we use it, and it's become incredibly useful over the years in that thrust towards literacy.
Interesting. I want to talk a little bit about cross-cultural fertilization in all directions. Do you find that Hispanic or predominantly Hispanic choirs are wanting to branch out and incorporate music that's, white English or African American or Asian, and how does that work?
My experience is that with the younger singers, they love reaching out to the different cultures that are presented to them. They love singing in English, Spanish, Tagalog, French, Italian, whatever is offered to them. If I, as the director, offer that to them, I find that with my older singers, it's often challenging for them to want to sing in English, but they will do it, especially when we're having a multicultural celebration. But it takes time. And as I mentioned, the older some of my singers are, the more resistant they are to including different languages. And sometimes it takes a while, but they find that they do like it. Whether we're singing in Hebrew or Latin, they actually enjoy that as well. But it does take time.
What's your experience, Stella?
I've been working at a bilingual parish for 16, 17 years. And the first time we came together for Holy Week, it was a difficult process both for the English choir and the Spanish choir. One, it was the language. Secondly, it was the style of music. But after so many years, both choirs have learned to love each other's music. But the key for our choir was that there was enough of us bridge builders that spoke both English and Spanish. We read music, so the Spanish speakers felt comfortable with me, the English speakers felt comfortable with the director. And it's funny, it's suddenly something happens that makes you realize that you've grown a lot. This past Holy Week, the pastor decided that we were going to have separate Good Friday services. I was not happy with that, but okay, And when I told my choir, the Spanish choir, that we were going to have a separate service, I felt. I got comments that they were sad that they were not going to get to sing some of those English songs that they had learned to love. And it was the same thing with the English choir. And so the director, she told me, even though it's an English service, I decided to put some of those bilingual songs that we've learned to love too. And so for me, that was just a sign that we've grown.
In our Hispanic communities, a lot of our music is dance-based. We love our dancing in our lives at parties, and we love singing along to the radio and just singing with our friends. We love singing in rondallas with a mariachi. We love singing at church. And that music is also loved by others who are not in the Hispanic culture, but who adore it. And in my experience, our communities love singing together, but there are some people who are very opposed to it. There are some people who are hardcore opposed to wanting to sing in a language that is not their own.
Hispanics or Anglos?
In both directions, okay. Both if they're a native Spanish speaker not wanting to sing in English, or an English speaker not wanting to sing in Spanish. So at my church, sometimes we just default to the Latin, and that can work out well. But I think one of the holes it's created is when we have music that is just in one language simply translated to another. I don't know that that's a sign of super cultural richness. It's just a sign of acknowledgement that others might want to understand what's happening, and it's simply a translation. And I think that when we have bilingual masses, that's fun to do because it adds understanding to folks who don't speak the opposite language. But when you build a bridge, as Estella was mentioning, and you actually include music from the other culture, in the tradition of the other culture, and you sing that just in that language, or maybe do add that translation, then that is actually richer in my experience. And that is a challenge, because I think a lot of people just use songs in one language or the other and they just translate them.
Yeah. Not every song in a bilingual service needs to be bilingual. You always need to have something where one community identifies themselves with, and the same with the English. And then some bilingual, and you know, the key is in the selection, in the mix, so that no one is put in a very uncomfortable situation, and learn brand new music for the bilingual services. You don't want to learn a lot of bilingual music, new music that you don't use throughout the year.
And quite honestly, sometimes in translation, something is lost. The essence of a song can be lost so easily in translation, but if you keep it in its original form, it's delightful. It can be deep, it can be moving. And then, for example, in my community, one of my students and we wrote a piece together for the washing of the feet on Holy Thursday, and we sang it for years and years, probably about 10 or 12 years. And the year that it was taken off the program, community members were wondering what happened. What's gone wrong? Where's our song? Our community was wondering where their song was, because it's not sung anywhere else. It's not been published because it is our St. Cecelia song. And when it hasn't been there, it's been very obvious that something from our celebration has gone missing. And it was a piece that was written in English and Spanish.
Nice. I want to switch topics. This sort of comes from my own personal story and strengths. What is your experience of introducing more traditional, Western European art music? Do you find that some of your Hispanic singers bring some of that vitality and dance rhythm to it, so that this Baroque has a better dance quality than when, maybe some of us try to sing it? Or do you find there's kind of a resistance because this music doesn't come from our culture and it just doesn't have the soul and speak to us? Do you have any experience with the kind of thing I'm talking about?
I think they enjoy it. I mean, it's different, but they like the fact that it's different and that they're learning. You might have resistance from some, mainly because they are uncomfortable and unsure, and they just have to have a leader to keep reassuring them, you're doing well, don't worry, you're doing well. And the goal is to get them to a level where they claim that song as their song, and I think that can happen.
In my experience, this is my 20th year at St. Cecelia, and I work a lot with musicians at my parish, at my mother's parish, which is nearby, and also around the Archdiocese. I go around teaching on behalf of our Archdiocese, and there's such variety in what Hispanic musicians can accomplish. And probably in my 20 years, one thing that I've really learned to do more is to add more movement, especially because in the Latino culture, sometimes it's all about the dance and the excitement. And so when I've introduced new pieces outside of the Latino culture that do have that dance element, I actually ask my singers to dance, and we sway and we move forward and back. We move through different planes.
17th century German or 18th century Italian?
Well, I'll take a Hebrew piece that's several hundred years old.
Okay.
And Hashi Venu. And Brahms actually turned that into a canon as well, a 3-part canon. And my singers, actually, I taught them the melody just by hand singing, la ti do re, la ti do re. And after we learned that in 3 parts, then we transcribed it. And then we learned it in Hebrew, but we learned it with dance. And we sang it during Holy Week, and they really owned it. They owned it, and it helped. The movement helped to build excitement. It helped them to stay together when the 3 different parts are so different and they end differently. And some have sustained notes while others are still moving through, and that phrasing has to match up. So I do try to honor other cultures within my own Latino community of singers. And that's something that I hope to develop further.
Wonderful. Well, this is just a gift to be able to visit with you and to have this sort of cross-cultural exchange and for all of us to learn about the great vitality and energy of Hispanic choirs. So thank you, Estella and Pablo, for this conversation.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks.